So this afternoon, I'm going to do a little session on Prophesy to the Mountains of Israel. Now, this will be a little bit, if you've watched some of the stuff that I have on, this will be kind of a combination of a few different ones, kind of organized a different way, with a little bit of new information. Just as a backdrop, though, Pam and I, a year ago, we were able to go to, and now why is my slide not advancing? There we go. We were able to go to Israel. And one of the things that we did that was a little bit different, well, I'll talk about that in just a minute. We were able to go to the mountains of Israel. And Israel has a very interesting geography. The geography is very important to the way things are done. And we'll talk a little bit, it has a lot to do with the Bible history and that sort of thing. I speak here every week at Fellowship Bible Chapel. I teach Bible on occasion. I do a prophecy update. And usually in the prophecy update, we focus on things going on in the world and Middle East that might relate to things that are prophesied to come about in the final days in the Bible. And it does appear, this is for some reason my buttons aren't working. We have the Middle East seems to be always in a state of fracturing. Things seem to be falling apart. It seems to be breaking up. Randy talked about this in his sessions about the fact that this is very often blamed on Israel, that if we could just solve the Israel problem, everything would just be fine in the Middle East. But there were wars, hundreds and hundreds of battles fought under the banner of Islam and other religions in the Middle East throughout history for centuries. And that happened before Israel came into existence 70 years ago. And it was a miraculous thing that happened. But all of these things that we see seem to be converging at the same time. So today I'm going to talk about the mountains of Israel. Now on the left is a map. Can we turn off some of the overhead lights so they can see the screen a little bit better? The two on the right. There you go. Is that okay? Can you see me? Can you see me? They can see me from the space shuttle. I know what you're going to say. So when I play golf with my friends, I always wear, sometimes I have these really bright neon orange or yellow shirts. Because, I want you to be able to see me. I don't want you to hit into me. So on the left is a map that a pastor friend of mine from Calvary Chapel, Old Path in Cypress, California, Chris Quintana, made up for his people that he took recently on a tour of Israel. And the interesting thing when you look at this map is that if you see I don't know what's going on here. There we go. So, you come into Tel Aviv, and the usual route is you go up the coast, you go across the Jezreel Valley, Megiddo, Carmel, Megiddo, Nazareth. You come up here, you go around the Sea of Galilee, up to the Golan Heights. Then you come down the Jordan Valley, all the way to Qumran and Masada. And in this case, they came back, and then they came back up, and they ended up in Jerusalem. But and this is a typical tour that you take when you go to Israel. Why? Because Israel's divided. There's parts of Israel that you don't usually see, and it's these parts in here. It's the mountains of Israel, both to the north of Jerusalem and to the south of Jerusalem. These are very important parts. This is the biblical heartland. Today it's known as the West Bank, and here's a map of the West Bank. And as you can see from the different colors of the West Bank is very divided. Now the basic divisions of the West Bank that are lived with today, I will say West Bank, I don't like that term. I prefer the term Judea and Samaria, but I'll use the term West Bank because everybody uses it. But in the West Bank today, you see all of these divisions. The white areas are... you see here, you see the white areas, blue, and these areas. So the white areas are areas A and B. Those are areas that the Palestinian Authority has control over. The lighter shade areas are area B. I'm sorry, area C. This shade and the dark blue shade are area C. Those are under Israel control. And essentially what happens today is that in the blue areas, the Palestinians are not allowed to do any activity or building. Now, the reason this was drafted up after the Oslo Accords in 1994 by Yitzhak Rabin. The Oslo Accords were entered into in September of 1993. There's a big ceremony on the White House lawn. I'm sure you've seen videos of it. And the big deal at that was there was Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres on behalf of Israel, and there was Yasser Arafat and a much younger man named Mahmoud Abbas. He was about 48 at the time, on behalf of the Palestinians. And they had a big ceremony on the White House lawn. I happened to be in Washington, D.C. that day, and actually saw the next day. I had a chance to talk with a friend from high school who was a congressman who was there and was very excited about, I saw Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin shake hands on the White House lawn. But Rabin was an intelligent man, and while he wanted to have peace and he was trying to strive for that, he knew that there were security concerns that were paramount if Israel was going to maintain its character as a Jewish state. And so what he did was he came up with a plan. And when he came up with this plan, he just didn't sit down and start looking at a map. He had topographical maps, and he went and looked at every hill and valley and ravine as to how that would have an impact both on Israel's water sources and other resources and on its security. Because he knew that there was a potential problem. And as Randy talked to you in his hours, there have been these intifadas that have taken place over time, and they usually correspond to the time when Israel has given land back to the Palestinians. We've seen what happened in Gaza in 2005. Israel, under Ariel Sharon, exited Gaza completely. They left behind a very strong agricultural infrastructure in Gaza. Greenhouses, irrigation, that sort of thing. What happened when they left? The Palestinians in Gaza tore it apart because it had been built by the Jews and they didn't want to have anything to do with anything that had been built by the Jews. But they had the seeds there for a good agricultural community. And what are they doing today? And I'll talk about this some tomorrow. They're launching kites into southern Israel and destroying agricultural fields. Thousands of acres have been burned of all of their agricultural crops, and it's having an impact on the economy in southern Israel because the economy in southern Israel is largely tied to agriculture. So and if you look at a detailed topographical map, you will see that it would be insanity because this whole area there in the West Bank is pretty much mountainous until you get over to the right, which is the Jordan Valley. And it would be a security nightmare if all of that land was given away by Israel to the Palestinians as they exist today. And as they have stated in their charters and documents, that they really want to destroy Israel. Nevertheless, people are continuing to try to make peace. The president supposedly has the ultimate peace plan and the ultimate peace deal that'll be coming out. They say sometime after Ramadan is finished, which is not too far away. And who knows what it's going to be. I would be surprised if it doesn't include giving back some portions of the West Bank to complete control of the Palestinians. But at the Camp David, under Bill Clinton, the Palestinians were offered, I think Randy accurately stated this, 95% of the West Bank and all of Gaza. And they turned it down because it wasn't sufficient. Why? Because it didn't result in the ultimate destruction and going away of the Jewish state. So one of the things when you drive around Israel, they have these are pop-up checkpoints. And as you're driving through areas of the West Bank, which I'll acknowledge most tourists don't because it's too expensive. It's hard to get buses in there. They have to have bulletproof glass, armed guards, that sort of thing, a lot of extra insurance. And so if you get on a tour like that, it's because you're paying a lot of extra money for it. And you'll see there's these barricades all over the place. So this is a temporary checkpoint that was set up, and you see this. It says here, this road leads to Palestinian village. The entrance for Israeli citizens is dangerous. There are many signs that you see. These are more permanent signs And this one says, this road leads to Area A at the bottom. You can read the Arabic and Jewish words later if you want. This road leads to Area A under the Palestinian Authority. The entrance for Israeli citizens is forbidden, dangerous to your lives, and is against the Israeli law. And so people that do go into those areas of the West Bank, they go there at their own risk. And the reason they don't like people to go there is because they get kidnapped. They get kidnapped, and the security forces have to go in and try to find them, and it can be, going in there is at some risk. Now, we were in there for several days, 3 or 4 days. Maybe we're just stupid Americans. It didn't bother us that much. Especially when you go to the archaeological sites, you're not worried because you're worried that if you fall down and hurt yourself, nobody will find you because there's nobody else around. You're the only people there. This conference took place about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. Crisis at Checkpoint 5. Now, Dr. Michael Brown, usually what they do is they will invite one speaker to kind of present the other side. Now, I don't know what the criteria that goes into this. I did listen to this. Michael Brown did a good job. I think he made a very good case for defending Israel and the importance of Israel in the Bible and Bible prophecy as we understand it. Now, his view is totally rejected by the other people that we're putting on the conference. They are very anti-Israel. They will say they're not anti-Israel. And I will say, as I said, Michael Brown did a good job. Unfortunately, there are some issues with Dr. Brown in his defense of these people in the New Apostolic Reformation and people like Benny Hinn and Bill Johnson and other people of that ilk. So I don't know if he was chosen because they know the people won't listen to what he said, because of a lot of people just don't listen to him because of who he not only endorses, but he defends on his radio program. But look, in the sense of, did he do a good job talking about Israel from what I understand to be a biblical perspective? Yes, I think he did a good job. And you can find those out there on the internet. But one of the things that I noticed when we went through the West Bank and Israel, the mountains of Israel, the biblical heartland, and I'll explain to you why it's the biblical heartland in just a moment, was the hillsides. To me, it was, I had never been there. I've read the Bible stories about what happened in the Central Mountains and that mountainous spine from Hebron all the way up to Shechem. But I didn't realize the topography as well as I thought. But the other thing that shocked me was that if you notice this hillside, it's terraced for farming. Here's a more modern example. This is what a lot of these hillsides would have looked like. This is one in a Palestinian village south of Jerusalem. And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that every hillside, every mountain that we drove for 30 miles on either side of the road, from top to bottom, was terraced for farming. Now, there were a lot of people that lived there at one point in time. Now, there's a lot of people who try to explain this away. Well, the Jews weren't really there. The Israelites weren't there. This is all a myth. These are all made-up stories. But I am telling you that there is massive evidence, old evidence, of people that lived in this land for a long period of time. So the land of Israel is very mountainous. It's, of course, the Dead Sea on the lower left is the lowest spot on the planet Earth. It's about 1,300 feet below sea level at the shore. Although as the Dead Sea shrinks, that number keeps going down a little bit. And if you go there, you can see that because so much of the Jordan River water is siphoned off, the Dead Sea is dying. Because it's just not getting any water anymore. There have been a lot of talk about creating an aqueduct from the Red Sea down to replenish the waters, and also because it's downhill, it goes from sea level to 1,300 feet below sea level. They could use that for hydroelectric power. But there's been talks of Jordan and Israel trying to do a joint project like that. Jordan, of course, is on the eastern side of the Dead Sea. And you drive down there, and it's interesting. You'll see these hotels, and they're like half a mile from the edge of the water. They used to be right on the edge. They were shorefront hotels, and a lot of times they're empty. They'll just close that one down and build one a little bit closer. But now the problem that they have is they're having a lot of trouble with sinkholes because the water levels are getting so low. So from there, you go all the way up to the far north, Mount Hermon, which is close to 10,000 feet above sea level. So you can see this very dramatic rise and this spine that runs up through the middle of Israel. Now this is the area known as the West Bank. Here's a cutaway side. And I found this, by the way, I found this graphic on a Mormon website. And so bad theology, but great graphics. So go for the graphics, but that's all you should go for. Unless you want to understand what they believe. But you can see this as a cutaway. You can see the Jordan River there. Jericho is about 825 feet below sea level. The Sea of Galilee is around 500 feet below sea level up in the north. And you can see Jerusalem there. And this spine goes all the way up through the middle. The highest point in the south is at Hebron. It's about, I think it's a little bit over 3,000 feet above sea level. And you get down to the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem is about 2,600 feet. And the Temple Mount is around 2,500 feet above sea level. So the Temple Mount is not the highest part. That's what that will help you understand the geography of Jerusalem. And I did a teaching out in California on the mountains of Israel, and I talked a lot about the geography of Jerusalem and the Western Hill and the development of the city over there. But and then of course it rises up to the tablelands of Transjordan or of Jordan, and they're a little bit higher. So when you go from Ammon to Jerusalem or Jericho, it's downhill. Or when it says that Jesus was in Jericho and he went up to Jerusalem, you can get a bit of an idea that the Bible was true. It says he went up, and it means he went up to Jerusalem. And I don't know that tour's going anymore, but we drove 20-some years ago on our first trip there. We went up the old road from Jericho to Jerusalem up through the valley. And it was quite steep, very narrow, and it was up the whole way. So it's a very interesting lay of the land. Plus, the other thing that you understand too is the disciples of Jesus walked everywhere. So they're walking up and down these things, and it's like, and we're complaining about, the car's not getting up this hill very well. Well, imagine trying to walk it on your own. Now, there are a number of prophecies that relate to the restoration of the nation of Israel. One of the prophecies is the Valley of Dry Bones that we see in Ezekiel chapter 37. Now, there is, some people teach, and I disagree with them very strongly, that some of the prophecies in Ezekiel 35, 36, 37 have already been fulfilled. I believe that some of them are in the process of being fulfilled. They are partially fulfilled, and we're seeing that unfold right in front of our eyes. That's kind of an interesting thing. In the Old Testament, or in the New Testament, there were the lady that prophesied about the coming Messiah. Was it Anna? Was that her name? In the New Testament. And Simeon, Simeon says, my eyes have seen the Messiah. So these were people who had the opportunity to actually see prophecy being fulfilled right in front of their eyes. We live at that time. We should take great comfort from that. We should be very motivated about that this Bible is really true. It said that the Jewish people would be restored to their land in the latter times, and we're watching this happen as they're being gathered from all the nations of the world. It's not finished yet. And at the end of the 70th week of Daniel, we know that there's an even greater ingathering from all the four corners of the world, but we're seeing A lot of this happened in our time, and the regathering has been not just by happenstance or by accident. It's actually happening in the directions from the west and from the north and from the south and from the east, in the order that some of the Old Testament prophets have prophesied that it would occur. And so like Anna, like Simeon, that were there at the time of Jesus, they were seeing Bible prophecy being fulfilled about the coming Messiah. We're living in a similar period of time. So if we're living in a similar period of time, what is said in the Bible about what's going to happen is important. Now, we need to be careful that we don't get too dogmatic about it and we make it into a salvation or divisive issue about exactly how certain things are going to play out. Because sometimes, can we agree that the world changes very quickly these days? A couple of years ago, this thing called ISIS rose up in Syria. They caused a lot of trouble. People wondered what was going to happen. They wanted to establish the caliphate, and now they've been reduced to a terrorist force. They don't really control that. They still do control some land, some pockets of area in Syria. There was a big article in the Wall Street Journal this morning about how they're having problems with ISIS in Afghanistan now. So they're still around, but they're not the force that they were. Turkey has been sort of a dormant country for a long period of time. For 400 years, Turkey dominated the Middle East and parts of Europe. Then it went away around 1917. By 1920, it was pretty much gone. And modern Turkey came on the scene, but now we have a guy in Turkey, and I mentioned this last Sunday in my talk, he's running around building all sorts of things. He's building giant mosques. He's building a mosque in Istanbul that will seat 37,000 people. Hey, we should contact him about the little extra money for our building, for building our own building here. He's building what is, by most estimates, the largest airport in the world outside of Istanbul. It'll open later this year. He's building mosques all over the world, giant mosques. There's a big controversy right now. He's building a mosque. They've just, in, I think it's Austria, they've just kicked out 7 imams and closed the mosque that they teach at because they're pro-Erdogan and they're causing problems in Austria. But Erdogan's rise to power, it's been somewhat methodical, but it's ramped up a little bit. On the other hand, there are elections coming up in Turkey in a couple weeks, and it's possible he might lose. Now, since he controls the ballot boxes, I think that's going to be rather difficult, but things can change very, very quickly. A world leader can be, we've had this happen in our lifetime. A world leader or world leaders have been assassinated. And so the world is very volatile today. So this prophecy about the dry bones, just real quickly about that in Ezekiel chapter 37. Again, he said unto me, prophesy unto these bones, and say unto them, O ye dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord God unto these bones, behold, I will cause breath to enter you, and ye shall live. And I will lay sinews upon you, and will bring up flesh upon you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and ye shall live. And we have seen at least in terms of the Zionist movement started over 100 years ago, about 120 years ago, and Jews started coming back to Israel. They started buying land, they started building things, they started building Tel Aviv when, at the time, what is modern Tel Aviv were just sand dunes and swamps. There was nothing there when they broke ground for Tel Aviv about 1909. And then of course, we know what happened with the Holocaust when this vision of dry bones actually took on, for lack of a term, this vision took on some life, that here came Israel on the heels of the worst persecution in their history, the slaughter of Jews that happened in World War II. But Ezekiel 37 is not completely fulfilled. Why? Because a lot of people read the passage that I read to you and they stop. But we know that there's another part of the prophecy, and it says, and ye shall know that I am the Lord. Does Israel know today the Lord? No. Now look, there's an increasing number of individual Jews that are coming to faith in Messiah. You can find their testimonies at a great website called One for Israel. Just phenomenal testimonies that you read about. But, we also have the flip side of that. I see that Ambassador David Freeman of the United States was praising the gay pride parade that took place today in Jerusalem, or yesterday. So they don't know the Lord yet. It's something that's in process. It continues in Ezekiel chapter 37, and ye shall know that I am the Lord when I have opened your graves, and shall put my spirit in you, and ye shall live, and I shall place you in your own land. Then ye shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken it and performed it, saith the Lord. And it goes on to say this, neither shall they defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions. But I will save them out of all their dwelling places, wherein they have sinned, and will cleanse them. So shall they be my people, and I will be their God. And the heathen shall know that I, the Lord, do sanctify Israel, even when my sanctuary shall be in the midst of them forever. So we know that that prophecy is not yet fulfilled. But Ezekiel 35, 36, and 37, and I think I've shared my view before, is that I think these are prophecies that happen over time, and then they all conclude with, and they will know that I am the Lord. They will know that I am the Lord. They will know that I am the Lord. But there's a buildup to where that ultimate thing comes together, and we know that that happens by and large at the end of the 70th week. Zechariah talks about it, Romans 11. All these different passages prophesy that. So what I want to do is I want to just take a look at some of the prophecies in Ezekiel 35 and 36, which talk about the mountains of Israel. Okay, so how's that for a 10-minute introduction? That's John time. Moreover, this is Ezekiel chapter 35. The word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Mount Seir and prophesy what? Against it. It's a prophecy against an area. Because thou hast had a perpetual hatred, verse 5, and hast shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity, in the time that their iniquity had an end. Now we could go into a lot of the historical basis of this and some of the other fact that some of these prophecies, many of the prophecies in Jewish eschatology, have double fulfillments, or there's a partial fulfillment and then there's a much more detailed fulfillment at the end. So they have Jewish eschatology speaks in terms of patterns very often. So we see a pattern develop. So we know, for example, that things that were going on with the southern kingdom of Judah at the time of the Babylonian captivity, when they were judged for their sins and their iniquity, will be similar, I believe, to what happens in the end to the church, God's people, faithful remnant at the time, and they will be judged for their sins, similar to how Judah was judged for their sins. It's because it's a pattern, and these patterns repeat, and you should look at what are the patterns? What's this setting up in these Old Testament passages? In Ezekiel 35, it's talking again about Mount Seir. I will make thee perpetual desolations. Not singular, but plural, perpetual desolations. And thy city shall not return, and ye shall know that I am the Lord. Because thou hast said, why are they being judged? Because thou hast said, these two nations and these two countries shall be mine, and we will possess it, whereas the Lord was there. So we know. So my question is, and today, and we'll see passages in Ezekiel 36 in just a moment to talk a little about some similar things. Are there people that today live in the mountains of Israel that act like they own it? The answer is yes. Is it possible that these prophecies in Ezekiel 35 and 36 relate to, well, there's no question about Ezekiel 36. I think Ezekiel 35 is a prophecy about what's going on in Israel today. And you can look, it doesn't take much looking. Here is an article that is in Hamram Online. It's an Arab publication. And what it's talking about is the fact that they want this area, the mountains of Israel. Just listen to a couple paragraphs from this. Analysts and observers believe that post-Abbas there will be chaos and bickering among key families. That's a picture of Mahmoud Abbas in the hospital a few weeks ago. He's about 83. He's a chain smoker. He went in for, I think, an ear infection and ended up with a bad pneumonia. And a lot of people are wondering what's going to happen when Abbas leaves the scene. Will there be chaos in the Palestinian Authority? There's no clear successor. Will Israel step in and take advantage of that to deal with the issue that they've had with this disruption and this division? I mean, really, you want to talk about a divided society. You drive through the West Bank and there's roads for Israeli citizens and there's roads for Palestinians, and it's very difficult. You have to know somebody to be able to navigate around, particularly when roads are closed, as they often are when there's disruption. Tel Aviv will this is what this says. Tel Aviv will take advantage of this new situation and reward those who cooperate with it through financial support while imposing a siege and restrictions on those who disagree with it. Annexing Area C, that's the dark blue and sort of, some might say pink, orangish color. Annexing Area C in the West Bank would be easier than at any other time due to the political vacuum. One of the directors of the Al-Quds Center explained that Israelis' settlement plans will never abandon the occupied West Bank territories, since the West Bank is the only option for Israel's urban expansion. Due to current circumstances, Israeli plans to annex Area C has already started by holding on to the West Bank. It will be the graveyard of peace agreements, which since the start were an illusion and show Israel's intentions of staying in control of the West Bank. And this person said this: the Israeli right wing always talked about the religious and ideological significance of the West Bank hills, noting that Naftali Bennett, leader of the Jewish Home Party, who represents settlers in the cabinet, said the West Bank holds the history of the forefathers and great Jewish heritage is located there and can never be abandoned. The article continues, for Israel's right wing, it is more important than Jaffa, Accra, and Haifa. Any influential parties on the Israeli scene, with the exception of the left-wing Meretz party, strongly support remaining in the West Bank, albeit in different shapes and forms, with variations on the territories that must remain under Israeli control. There's a reference to an article at the Begin Sadat Center by retired Major General Gershon Houghton. Again, I speak Hebrew like a American who doesn't know Hebrew, who doesn't know how to speak it. But he has this article there, and here's just some of what he says. And he says, we're not going to give this up. With coordinated strategic planning, stepped-up building, and extensive agricultural development, the PA is striving with overt European support to prevent Israel from realizing its national interests in the West Bank. This means not only struggling to broaden the Palestinian living space, but also to fragment and isolate areas of Jewish settlement. So what does that mean? It means that what's happening is that Europeans have been coming in and supporting Palestinian building up and agricultural projects in this area that they're not supposed to be doing anything in. And it's a major problem. So that's why you'll hear every now and then they've gone in and they've bulldozed homes that have been built up. And it's a problem. There's even suggestion in the articles that Israel uses weaponized archaeology, that they're using this archaeology to establish that to change the character of the area, is one of the articles that I read. For example, in the old city of Jerusalem, to the south, they've made phenomenal discoveries. They discovered a seal of Hezekiah. It appears that they discovered a seal of the prophet Isaiah, the prophet who was there at the time of Hezekiah. Those discoveries came in a very small area just to the south of the southern end of the Temple Mount. And this has been in the last year. And the Isaiah, what appears to be the seal of Isaiah, was discovered only in the last 4 months. And these discoveries continue. They're continuing to do things in the city of David, to the south of the current old city, and they're finding phenomenal things that are happening. They're finding pathways up to the Temple Mount and that sort of thing. And this is very difficult for the Palestinians to deal with, because why? Because it's establishing that the Jews have long had a tie to that land, and the title was set by God that they would have possession of this land. They were out of it for a long time. They were out of the land. Because why? God dispersed them to the nations. We'll see a little bit about that in just a moment too. And so Ezekiel chapter 36 goes on and talks about this also. So there was a prophecy against Mount Seir. Now there is a prophecy to the mountains of Israel. And say, ye mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord God, because the enemy hath said against you, aha, even the ancient high places are ours in possession. And so what you see is there's this claim made on the West Bank. Of course, this red circular area represents the area of the mountains of Israel, Beersheba at the south end, all the way up to the Jezreel Valley in the north. So I'm going to talk about two cities just briefly that are located there, one in the south, Hebron, and one in the north, Shechem. So Hebron is located here, about 20 minutes south of Jerusalem, and then Shechem is located to the north. Now, it's interesting that last year in Krakow, Poland, about a year ago, they had a big conference. The UN World Heritage Site had a big conference, and one of the main things that they did at that conference was to say, Hebron is for Palestinians. And so the question is there evidence that the Jews were even in Hebron? And the reason I bring this up is, people say, well, why study archaeology? I don't really dig archaeology. I don't like archaeology. And so why study it? Why do we look at the Old Testament? Why, as one pastor in Atlanta said recently, we should unhitch ourselves from the Old Testament. But remember, the early church only had the Old Testament. The books of the New Testament that we know as the New Testament weren't written until about 50 to 70 AD. And John wrote Revelation near about 95 AD. So what did they have until that time? They had the Old Testament. When Jesus was on the road to Emmaus after the resurrection, and these two disciples were saying, haven't you heard what's been going on? What did Jesus do? He took the Old Testament scriptures and he opened up to them and showed them that these Old Testament scriptures were about him. Yet we have evangelical pastors running around America now saying, unhitch yourself from the Old Testament. It's old. We want something new and fresh. But really, when you'll find out is they unhitch themselves from the New Testament as well. So Hebron is a fascinating place. There's this massive structure there that Herod built called the Cave of Machpelah. There's also in the north part of Hebron, there's a holy site called Mamre. And when you find out what happened was, you find out that Herod built at several sites to commemorate important things in Jewish history. One of the places he built was at Mamre. Why? Because that's where Abraham got the promise, you will have a son, and your son will lead to the Messiah. That happened at Mamre, at this place that you can see right here in the center. The Cave of Machpelah, we'll see here in just a moment. That's why, because that's where Abraham and Sarah and his son Isaac and his wife Rebekah, and then their son Jacob and his wife Leah are all buried underneath what's now this structure. So he bought this about 2000 BC, and about 2,000 years ago, Herod came in, as Herod would. He wanted to set up pilgrimage sites, so he built at Mamre, he built there, and of course we know that he built at the Temple Mount. When Constantine came in about 300 AD, he built at 4 places to commemorate the holy things that had happened in the Christian faith. One of the places he built was at Mamre. Why? Because that's where we got the promise of the coming Messiah. It's important to Jews, it's important to Christians. And he wanted to commemorate that. He also built at the Church of the Nativity the original Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. Why? Because that's where Jesus was born. He also built at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, because that's where Jesus was crucified and rose again. And then he built at the Mount of Olives, because that's where Jesus ascended. So these holy sites kind of overlap. Hebron has a very strong history for the Jewish people, but it has some terrible things have happened. There was a massacre back in 1928. Around 80 Jews were slaughtered. And I mean, I could show you some pictures of this that would turn your stomach. Women and children and men killed in Hebron by Palestinian Arabs that the Mufti in Jerusalem, the person who runs the Temple Mount, got upset because he said the Jews were going to take back the temple. But the Jews have lived there in Hebron for 3,000 years. It was, well, we'll see a little bit about that in just a moment. So when this happened up, this was a big vote last summer, last July. Nikki Haley, the UNESCO vote on Hebron is tragic on several levels. It represents an affront to history. Today's vote does no one any good and causes much harm. It undermines trust that is needed for the Israeli-Palestinian peace process to be successful. And then Benjamin Netanyahu, here's an aerial view of Hebron on the left, and here's Netanyahu speaking at the UN last fall.
So is there no limit to the UN's absurdities when it comes to Israel? Well, apparently not. Because in July, UNESCO declared the Tomb of the Patriarchs in Hebron a Palestinian World Heritage Site. That's worse than fake news. That's fake history.
And he's right. So I'm going to skip over some of this. You can go to Hebron today to the old Tel Ramida. There's a staircase there, one of the oldest staircases ever found in archaeology, maybe the oldest ever found, probably 4,700 years old, which means that when Abraham came to the city, that would have led up this way. They didn't have cars back in those days, as you probably know, or roads like that. It led up to the top of the Tel, where the governing seat would have been. And so this staircase would have been 700 years old when Abraham came on the scene. And it's been uncovered. David reigned from that Tel back there. His palace was there. They haven't uncovered it yet, just because it's in a very volatile area. But this is where Abram would have come when he came into the Holy Land. He was there. He may have walked up those stairs, just like you can go to Tel Dan in northern Israel today and you can see a gate. And it's very likely, I don't think there's any question that Abraham, when he came, or Abram at the time, when he came to the land of Canaan, walked through that gate. And you can see these places where the biblical patriarchs and biblical characters actually lived. Well, what happened at Hebron is, and there's just an enormous number of passages in Genesis especially, and it emphasizes over and over and over again. Let's just look at two of them quickly. For example, Genesis and Jacob. Okay, so we know Abraham's buried, Sarah's buried there, then Abraham, then Isaac and Rebekah. Those stories are all in Genesis. And every time it happens, it says something similar to what it says in Genesis chapter 49. When Jacob is in Egypt, but when Jacob's in Egypt seeing Joseph being reunited with his long-lost son, he says, when I die, don't bury me here in Egypt. I want to be buried in the land of my fathers. And he charged them and said unto them, I am to be gathered unto my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite for possession of a burying place. Abraham actually bought that land. And today, when you go there, it is one of the most divided, hotly contested places on the planet. Hebron is, in my view, is sort of like the epicenter of the conflict between the Palestinians and the Jewish people. And they followed what Jacob said, Genesis 49. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife, and they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. The purchase of the field and the cave that is therein was from the children of Heth. And all of these passages over and over and over and over again emphasize the fact that this cave was bought by Abraham. So I feel blessed I was able to go to the place where it seems that there's all these passages in the Old Testament and Genesis that talk about the importance of this particular place. And today, it's a very, very divided city. This is a little bit of a map of Hebron. And it looks like, somebody spilled purple spaghetti on it, right? And because that's the way Hebron looks. Here's a little bit more detailed map. And it's divided into a number of areas. For example, well, for some reason my laser pointer doesn't want to work. So you can see the red road there that kind of snakes down through the center of Hebron, and the purple roads. So the purple roads and the red roads are off limits to Palestinians. The red thing in the middle that's where the cave of Machpelah is. What you see as you drive around Hebron, there's checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint, and they're highly constructed. They're very tight. There's turnstiles like you would go through at a baseball game or an amusement park that only go one way. There's screens over the top because people throw rocks at each other, and so to get into the old city of Hebron, you have to go through this. Here's a little bit more detailed. The tell that I talked about is here in the lower left, and these, and you can see these X's or checkpoints. See all these blue and red X's? And the purple areas are Jewish settlements within the city of Hebron. So you go to Tel Remedia, there on top of the Tel, there's a Jewish neighborhood, but right across from it is a Muslim Palestinian neighborhood, and they don't get along. It's very volatile. There was a Jewish man who killed 25 or 30 people at in the mosque part of the cave of Machpelah. There's a synagogue and a mosque, and so what they did after that was in 1993, I believe. They came in and they shut down the area of the Palestinian shops, and today it's essentially a no man's land. Now, if you have a car with an Israeli license plate, you can drive through there, but you get up to the Tel. So here's this Tel and this historical thing. This is up here where David's palace was, where he reigned in Hebron. And what do you have? You have checkpoints, guard towers, you have Palestinian flag here, you have things stenciled on walls. This is Palestine. It should be obvious to you that it's very divided, but it's a very important part of biblical history, because you can stand on this Tel in Hebron and you can look out across the field. You can see the cave of Machpelah in the distance. I think it's going to come into view here. Oh, I guess I already went by it. But you stand there and you see, now this wasn't, of course, built up when Abraham bought it. You see the cave of Machpelah right there. And as Joel Kramer, our guide, said, I only read one verse when I'm here on the Tel at Hebron. And it's Matthew 1:1. The genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of Abraham, and he pointed to Mamre, and the cave, the son of David. Because where we stand was where David first ruled in Israel as king. So, for hundreds of years, the Jews would go there. They would go there not to pray to Abraham, but they go there to think about Abraham and his life and pray while they're meditating on that. And they were only allowed to go what's known as the seventh step. So for hundreds of years, they weren't allowed to go up into the mosque. Now there's a synagogue up there that you can go into. But here you have a perfect example of something in the mountains of Israel that are prophesied to be important in the end times. So important that the prophet Ezekiel devotes a chapter or two to a prophecy called saying starts off, prophesy unto the mountains of Israel. And here at the southern end is one of the anchors of the Jewish presence in that land. The other anchor would be to the north, would be Shechem. And we know that Shechem is important. It was the first stop, well, after what's now Tel Dan. Abraham stopped there, but he came to Shechem. And he did something very significant. He was a follower of God, and he came there and he built, it says here, and unto the Lord, and the Lord appeared unto Abram, and said, unto thy seed will I give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. The first altar built by Abram was in Shechem. And it says this, excuse me. So here's a little bit of a schematic, an old drawing of Shechem. Shechem sits in the middle of this valley. You have Mount Ebal would be mostly to the east, Mount Gerizim to the west, and you can see Shechem up there in the upper left-hand corner. It sits in this valley between the two. Here's an old picture of Shechem. This is part of the ancient tell. Here's a little video somebody made of a reconstruction of Shechem, so you can get an idea of what it looked like at the time that Israel came into the land in the late Bronze period, roughly 1300 BC, at the time of the conquest. And it shows how you would walk up to the city. They would build a stronger lower wall than this mud brick wall on top. And this would have been Shechem. Some people say it's one of the most beautiful places. It's probably the prettiest place in central Palestine. You can, of course, see Mount Ebal there to the right, Mount Gerizim to the left. And then there's a significant structure that is there in Shechem, which is known as the Temple Fortress. Has very thick walls, and it was a place of worship. And there today you can go and you can stand there, and in that area of the temple to the right is a standing stone, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Here's a graphic that Joel Kramer, our guide, did, not for us, but he did it before, but a very good graphic of Shechem. You can see the biblical city there in the middle, Mount Gerizim to the left. That's where the Samaritans live. And there still are a few, I think there's about 50 families of Samaritans left there in Mount Ebal on the right. It's located in the city of Nablus, which is where a large portion of the terrorists came from that were involved in the second and third intifadas. And so in Joshua chapter 8, it says that Joshua came here, and it says, then Joshua built an altar unto the Lord God of Israel in Mount Ebal, Joshua chapter 8, verse 30. As Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of whole stones over which no man had lift up any iron, and they offered thereon burnt offerings unto the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. And he wrote there upon the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he wrote in the presence of the children of Israel. Now, back in the 80s, there are people who excavated on Mount Ebal. We couldn't go up there because of some unrest at the time, but they believe that they've discovered at least the foundations of Joshua's altar. You can go to Tel Dan, you can find Jeroboam's altar, and I think that one's, there's just no question about that one. And all Israel and their elders, and so they're in this natural amphitheater. You have Shechem here, Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim, a natural amphitheater. Between the peaks, it's about a mile apart. The mountains rise up about 1,000 to 1,200 feet above the city level of Shechem. And it says this, and all Israel and their elders and officers and their judges stood on this side the ark, and on that side before the priests the Levites, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, as well as the stranger. as he that was born among them, half of them over against Mount Gerizim, and half of them over against Mount Ebal, as Moses the servant of the Lord had commanded before, that they should bless the people of Israel. And then they divide the people up. Now, what happened before Moses, who to my knowledge never made it into the Holy Land, but he had charged the people, saying, when you cross the Jordan, these shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people. And he named the 6 tribes. Then he says, and the others, you're going to stand on Mount Ebal. And one's going to shout curses, what happens if you don't follow God's teaching, and the other will shout the blessings. And so when they divided it up, now remember when they left Egypt, how many people were there? A couple million at least? Do you think they got less over the time they were in the wilderness? So there were probably, I think, it would be fairly safe to say, there might have been 1 million people on each mountain, one shouting curses, one shouting blessings, to remember. So here in this amphitheater, the curses on Mount Ebal, the blessings on Mount Gerizim. And then when you go there to the area of the temple fortress, there is this stone that stands at the southern end of this temple complex. And it's talked about in Joshua 24 as Joshua is giving his goodbyes to the people. So Joshua made a covenant, verse 25, chapter 24 of Joshua. So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day and set them a statute and an ordinance in Shechem. And Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God and took a great stone and set up there under the oak that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. And Joshua said unto all the people, behold, this stone shall be a witness unto us, for it hath heard all the words of the Lord which he spake unto us. It shall therefore be what? A witness unto you, lest ye deny your God. And many archaeologists believe that this stone is part of the actual stone that Joshua erected there to remind the people of the promises of God. The curses that were shouted on the mountain above, and the blessings shouted on the other mountain. The other thing that they did at that time in Shechem was something else. And the bones of Joseph. Joseph had died 400 and some years before this. And poor Joseph, he got drugged all over all over the Sinai and the desert for 40 years. And somebody like, can we just bury this guy already? I mean, really? Nope. He was placed in a coffin in Egypt, and he told him, bury me in the land of my fathers. And so in this tribal area, and the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt, buried they in Shechem in a parcel of ground which Jacob bought of the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver, and it became an inheritance for the children of Joseph. And you can stand there in Shechem at the old tell. You can look over to where the bones of Joseph are supposedly located, the tomb of Joseph. It's a very hot, contested spot. It's been burned many times or firebombed. And by the way, within eyesight, maybe a quarter mile away or less, is a church. That church is built over a well that Jacob bought. And we know the story of Jesus, who met the woman at the well. And remember the woman at the well? She said, well, your people worship in that mountain down there, and my people worship on this mountain here. That was Mount Gerizim, the Samaritans' mountain. And today you can go and you can see the remnants of the Samaritan temple that she would have been pointing to when she met Jesus at that well. So Jesus obviously thought it was a significant thing. So let's look real quickly, just give me 5 more minutes, at Ezekiel chapter 36. So this prophecy about the mountains of Israel, and then God's going to make this great promise to the people of Israel. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, when the house of Israel dwelt in their own land, they defiled it by their own way and by their doings. I've taught on that, to do a teaching on Ezekiel chapter 23. There's several versions of that there on YouTube if you want to look it up. My name and Ezekiel 23. Their way was before me as the uncleanness of a removed woman. In Ezekiel, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah are referred to as two sisters who are whores, for lack of a better term. That's the term that Ezekiel uses, so take it up with him when you see him, if you don't like that. Wherefore I poured my fury upon them for the blood that they had shed upon the land, and for their idols wherewith they had polluted it. And I'm thinking of these pride parades taking place in Israel just in the last 24, 48 hours. And God's punished them. I scattered them among the heathen, and they were dispersed through the countries according to their way, and according to their doings I judged them. And when they had entered into the heathen whither they went, they profaned my holy name, when they said to them, these are the people of the Lord, and are gone forth out of his land. And they're still doing this. But I had pity, God says, for my holy name, which the house of Israel had profaned among the heathen whither they went. Therefore say unto the house of Israel, thus saith the Lord, I do not this for your sakes, O house of Israel, but for my holy name's sake, which ye have profaned among the heathen whither ye went. And I will sanctify my great name, which was profaned among the heathen, which ye have profaned in the midst of them, and the heathen shall know that I am the Lord, saith the Lord God, when I shall be sanctified in you before their eyes. For I will take you from among the heathen, and gather you out of all countries, and bring you into your own land. They didn't deserve it. Just as we've already learned today, we don't deserve salvation either. But God in his mercy reaches out to us. And so the promise that he made to Israel to bring them back into their land, from which they've been gone for centuries, thousands of years, started to come true in our lifetime. And I know people say, well, they're terrible. They don't believe. That's right. Not yet. God will do a work among them. This is part of his plan. He works among you, us. We don't deserve it either. But he made a promise to them about that land. And if he doesn't keep their promises to them about that land, what makes you think he's going to keep any of his promises to you? And when they come back, then will I sprinkle clean water upon you, and ye shall be clean from all your filthiness, and from all your idols will I cleanse you. A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take that stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you, and cause you to walk in my statutes, and ye shall keep my judgments and do them. And then the great promise, and ye shall dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers, and ye shall be my people, and I will be your God. It's not over yet. We may live to see the final unfolding of this story. I will also save you from all your uncleanness, and I will call for the corn, and will increase it, and lay no famine on you. And then near the end of the chapter it says this, not for your sakes do I this, saith the Lord God. Be it known unto you, be ashamed and confounded for your own ways, O house of Israel. Thus saith the Lord God, in the day that I shall have cleansed you from all your iniquities, I will also cause you to dwell in the cities, and the wastes will be builded. And we've seen this amazing transformation. 70 years ago, the nation of Israel born. 50 years ago, 51 now, the reunification of the city of Jerusalem in the Six-Day War. God's not done yet with this plan. And we should look at these things that have already happened and say, well, that should be enough for us to believe all the promises of God, because he's kept these. But there's many, many more yet to come. And we see these things unfolding just like the Bible says. So take great comfort in the fact that God is a God that keeps his promises and reaches out to each and every single one of us when we don't deserve it. The example that we have is what he has done and what he is doing with Israel. Thank you.
We're going to receive an offering now and then take a short break. Thanks.